Now, to everyone's surprise, the ship didn't come to a stop over Manhattan or Washington or Chicago, but it instead coasted to a halt directly over the city of Johannesburg. The doors didn't open for 3 months. It just hovered there. Nobody could get in. And they eventually decided, after much deliberation, that the best thing to do would be to physically cut their way in.
January 2005, when we shot Alive in Joburg. The previous year, I think Neil had sort of called me and said he's got this crazy idea of putting aliens in a township environment and wants to shoot it like a documentary.
When I made Alive in Joburg, I just wanted to see this kind of crazy North American or, English sci-fi aspect put into this third world setting and see what that looks like.
I ended up being in that short. Jason Cope, who's also in this film, plays CJ, was the production manager on Alive.
There wasn't necessarily any story-related ingredients in that. There was thematic and visual ingredients. I guess the unique part of the idea is that they are homeless. They pitch up on our doorstep, entirely destitute, they're starving, their ship doesn't work, they floated to Earth in their life raft. While I was doing Alive in Joburg, I was actively looking for ways to get into directing feature films. And my agent had given my stuff to Mary Parent, who was going to produce Halo.
We first met Neil when we were considering the production of a film called Halo, based on the video game. As it was, Halo never happened.
The moment that film collapsed, when I was getting ready to sort of pack up and leave, Fran Walsh, it was actually Fran's idea, she was like, why don't we just keep all of the momentum and the energy going that we have here and just do another film?
Neil had this wacky idea for District 9, which he pitched to us, and we loved working with Neil so much that we thought it would be fun to turn District 9, his idea, into a feature film.
We sat around for quite a while inventing all these characters and what way to best tell the story of that world.
So we don't change its role. That's what it does. And you can use it.
We went for probably about 2 months of just collaborating face to face on the different stories and the characters. But when it actually got down to writing the nuts and the bolts, we worked very much alone.
It was a good collaboration, and we'd really, I'd put the elements out there, she'd write some stuff, I'd write some stuff, we'd swap it around. So it's quite collaborative.
Obviously the idea that the creatures, when eventually aliens came, they wouldn't come to New York and try and destroy New York. They wouldn't have, necessarily way more advanced cultures and all the answers for humanity. They might actually be able to be oppressed by human beings and actually therefore be weaker in a sense.
I think that the short history before the film takes place is that some sort of virus burnt like wildfire through the ship and killed off the upper echelons of their society. And they were the ones that stayed alive.
I feel like we probably constructed about at least 10 different stories with different characters. We had boards and pictures and things all over the place.
Within this framework, there are our characters. And the larger framework is that the aliens are oppressed and the humans, for the most part, directly or indirectly, are responsible for that.
Yeah, when I wiped...
In setting out to write a science fiction film in South Africa, there's a fine line between you want to pay attention to the politics of the country, but you want the science fiction to be an adventure.
South Africa has such a racially charged background, and it has such a history that adding this third alien element to it can make it a really interesting place for the film to take place in. But if you're not careful, it can become too complex and it can sort of become too cumbersome.
Neil was very adamant during the entire writing process that this isn't a political statement film. First and foremost, it's meant to entertain.
What I personally like about District 9 is its originality. I really haven't seen a film quite like this.
When we were writing the first draft of the script, it was kind of the sky's the limit. We didn't want to limit what we were putting down. At least I didn't want to limit what I was thinking of by budget constraints.
I think at the beginning of the process, I was writing things with that knowledge. I was holding back in places because I knew how much work certain things would be.
The combination of science, of fiction, and comedy. I mean, at its heart, it's a very funny movie.
His mind is incredibly free with all of that. You know, he just whatever's cool, he'll just do.
Neil wanted the aliens to look very much like insects. He liked the idea that they're like worker bees. We were always talking about them having a hive mentality.
That's definitely one of the ways that he's affected things, is to kind of break some of that down in me and go like, just do whatever you want. Just do it. You know, we'll figure it out. We still have a limited budget. This isn't a massive film, so there are constraints that have to be obeyed. Just go over there. No, you just...
Maybe a bit higher.
Yeah. I think that'll work. I mean, I think if every single soldier has one on his right arm and then on his left arm we have our ID, I think that'll totally unify them. I felt really creatively energized when we were coming up with the film, and pre-production is you know, from a design perspective and bringing things to life, because you really actually bring them to life, I think, in a way prior to shooting. The actors will bring the characters to life, but everything, even the characters to a certain degree, and their wardrobe and just what they are, gets created a long time before you're on set.
Surely, are we going to have like a long wardrobe session with him? Obviously, with a few hours.
Yeah, no, totally. This is really for tomorrow even though we're isolating. Like it's starting to get.
But at least you've got a feeling of the look.
Yeah.
So I can go and get, once we've got the day breakdown as well, I'll know exactly how many outfits and whether we need multiple, because for some of them we're going to need a lot of multiples.
It was a combination of stuff. During rehearsals, what we would do is we would work downstairs in the basement, and we would just continuously come up with a variety of different characters every single day.
Is this a weapon?
And then he would sort of give us guidance every 2 days as to what he did and didn't like.
The basic idea, it definitely spawned from the idea of two races meeting at one another's doorstep. I mean, that is what South Africa is. There's absolutely no question. South Africa is about that.
I feel very grateful that we're in a position to make a film that is set in South Africa, that features South African actors in this way, and that deals with this kind of subject matter. You stay behind Thomas, eh? You stay behind us. Clear, Thomas? Okay. All right. So we're gonna start zone 4.
In all of our sets, use what we could from the communities, including District 9.
I don't think there's been one clean set apart from Vicus's house in this whole movie. Everything is down and dirty. The crew are sick to death of it.
Okay, that's really getting unacceptable.
There's moments when you arrive at the shack on a given evening to do the last shot of the day, and you realize that some of the dressing that has been outside, however, has been used as firewood by security or been removed by some other dwellers in Soweto.
First scene was easy enough. That was kind of just establishing the story, and a happy scene with my husband bringing me breakfast in bed, and from there it was downhill. It was just craziness.
I'm being paid to be a boy of 12. As a kid growing up and wanting to shoot aliens and playing with my mates and my friends, you created all of this in the back of your mind.
Yeah, I remember the first day very clearly, and I wondered what the hell I was doing, because we were using a handheld Sony EX1. We didn't have a proper video system set up, so I was watching it on the viewfinder on the EX1, which is mental. So, you know, I was fairly stressed out. It's beeping. The film predominantly is a cinematic film. We had to sort of develop this dialogue as we were going through production to actually figure out what the best way is to sort of delineate between what you're seeing at different given moments in the film.
There's the real handheld documentary feel, and I was operating a camera within the scene that the Vickers character was playing off of.
You know, you see the state of the thing. This was a brand new shack. 6 months ago, this was new.
The most simple way to think of it is, do the actors know that the camera is there within the world that they are bringing to life? Because if they do, then it's this sort of found footage kind of element inside the film, whether that's a documentary filmmaker or a security camera. It's a real life camera that exists inside the story.
They're spending so much money to keep them here when they could be spending it on other things, but at least they're keeping them separate from us.
Then there's the cinematic stuff, which is the more traditional approach to filmmaking.
Honestly, we sort of refined that as we went along, and then we kind of met in the middle so that, you know, we would be handheld or we would have like a loose feel to the frame in the cinematic portion, and then that sort of just felt like it was the same film as the rest of the documentary part.
I was fairly stressed out in the beginning, hopping between those two and sort of seeing what would happen. The language of the film is this kind of existing footage, this documentary footage, and you start throwing in little cinematic pieces and then going back to documentary, and then before you know it, you're just watching cinematic stuff. So you're very much within the realm of normal film.
It won't be your traditional sit-down movie that you're used to watching. I think some people will be excited by it. Some people might be a little jarred by it at first.
It still smells like that. Could I have some of your salary from today? Because, I mean, you are the DOP, but you are not DOPing, eh? I am actually shooting.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, we'll have to. We'll do a fee split.
So we used handheld video camera, so Sony EX1. We ran around with it, acted as the documentary camera. The sound design and everything within that world is meant to be treated as though this really is a handheld video camera. And when we cross over into the cinematic stuff, we were using the RED platform to shoot it in a more traditional cinematic way.
I absolutely loved the scenes where there was a camera that I could play to as Vickers. The very first test we did was done on that basis. So it was Vickers being on camera for the first time. And so you've got this extra layer of, well, how is he on camera versus off camera? And it creates a very real feeling when he can kind of, you know, if every now and then he can look into the camera and look back at you and look into the camera. You connect with him.
No, it's fine. It's fine. He's a maniac. He's fantastic. He's really embraced his character. I mean, there've been times where he doesn't even really come out of character just to sort of, you know, keep him in there. We'll have break for lunch and he's still Vickers with the very Afrikaans accent.
At first, you know, Insia, I thought that it was going to be difficult to do this. But in fact, there's quite a lot of control. They're building in a little bit more control for me, you know. So if you have a look at this, okay, basically it almost worked like a fork, you know. So if you get the right angle, okay, that one didn't work so well, but okay, that didn't work so well either. But if you take, okay, that's also not.
He was a producer for years, and he pushes and pushes and pushes, and when everybody else falls over, he'll just keep going. He's much more energetic than any Energizer Bunny in the world.
Yes.
VX 128.1 Yankee, take 1, Bravo marker.
Charlie marker.
Look.
And action.
He doesn't stop speaking. He doesn't stop being on action and stuff. So, and he's been here every single day. He's been here more days than any one of the actors.
The way you engage him, you know, using the power of assertion.
It was very physically demanding. It was way more demanding than I had imagined it would be. Not having acted in a film like this before, I didn't really have a handle on how much actors go through, particularly if it's a lead part like this with the kind of emotions that Vickers experiences. He literally goes through virtually every major possible human emotion.
No, acting is not at all what I thought, you know. It damages you physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. It's damaging. It's a damaging job.
That close team of technical people, they make the performance what it is on screen. You can come with as many tools as you want to technically, and Neil will say, didn't play that. You weren't there. Just give me quivers.
The action I wanted to be not over the top. The whole film is meant to be not Hollywood. It's got this insanely Hollywood fantasy elements of these aliens living in South Africa. The approach that I wanted to take was that you've got this really bizarre element in the movie, and in order for it to be as real as possible, you should go about things without putting the effects on a pedestal.
That's a first day fight. That's a big fight. Everyone ready? Okay, here we go.
We had people right on top of explosions.
3, 2, 1, action!
I mean, certain of our weapons that are created in 3D, we had to come up with the end result for those weapons, their impacts on the ground, what they did to stunt people. Okay, what we have here is a dropship which crashes into the township. And the way we're achieving this effect, which is a dust explosion basically, we're using 5 air receivers, which each 500 liters of air. We pump them up to 10 bar, and then we have these actuator valves on them, which is basically a knife which opens up on electronic cue. And then on the end of each one of them we have a mortar, which is filled with dust and cork and various soft debris, which will then fire across this road over here and hopefully hit the house.
4, 3, 2, 1, go!
But what we're doing, we're staggering this, so we'll have the ship has a pointy nose, and then the motors sit on the outside of that. So what we're doing is firing the center first, so you'll get a point of dust and debris firing out through, and moments later we'll fire off the other air cannons. We'll create the shape of the aircraft crashing.
For the most part, when we were filming, my mind was never in the realm of visual effects. There was a constantly recurring question of, well, could we shoot it clean, right? Because the amount of work to paint Jason out for every single, or any gray suit guy representing an alien with a moving camera is a lot of work. And the background has to be, digitally re-stitched in.
Hey man, do agents open the door, please? Hello? We would like you to please silence. Okay, alright, that's unacceptable. That is totally unacceptable! Get out! Get out!
I play about 10 characters or something. I think I play a community of intergalactic beings, which sounds quite psychedelic.
Which is a very interesting process, and obviously you do all of this character and then it just gets taken straight out again because everything that you do basically gets painted out and the visuals get removed.
Thanks very much. Yeah, no, we had a...
Neil wants to create a feeling of authenticity with this movie. So from the word go, I've always said, let's use elements of today's life in South Africa and incorporate those into the sets.
Well, we're in Soweto, in Johannesburg, and of course it was discussed for numerous reasons, safety, economy, everything. Why not just shoot it in a green screen in New Zealand, which is where we were writing the film.
Where we are right now is we're in South Joburg. Geographically, this is part of Soweto, but it's a suburb or a neighborhood of Soweto called Chiawelo. And there's a lot of strange connections to the film that we never obviously set out to do, but one of them is all of these shacks around here, we only have access to this area, and we could only build our additional shacks here because all of these residents were moved into RDP housing somewhere else in Joburg, which is exactly what happens to the aliens in the film. So that's just a complete bizarre set of events.
It was the first landfill in that area in Soweto. People have been living on it and surviving off that landfill for the past 22 odd years.
Come towards us there. He's walking towards us.
We used the entire place and terrain as our inspiration to build D9. Every single thing that we have used in the squatter camp comes from the squatter camp. And with the help of the local people, it's just building shacks.
It's definitely something that I think would be incredibly difficult to replicate, just because of the amount of, like, there is so much visual detail here. Every single pixel is, you know, dirt or barbed wire or weeds, or it's incredibly visually rich.
Being out in Soweto was not a new experience for me, whereas looking at other people's experiences who don't normally operate in that environment, it gave it a raw feeling.
It's been like environmentally and physically extremely trying.
You know, a lot of the crew have felt like they're on some sort of episode of Survivor, you know? I think a lot of people feel like someone's gonna jump out any second and go, okay, it's not really a movie, we just wanted to see if you could make it, you know? Because it's grueling, you know? I've gone around to sort of the hardcore crew guys, and I, just out of interest, I say to them, so what's the worst place you've ever worked, man? You know, and then this is kind of, they're desperately searching, well, the desert was bad, you know, sandstorms. And then I say, well, was it worse? You know, was it harder on you? They're like, no, this is the hardest.
I think the biggest challenge on this job, and also the most enjoyable challenge, has been the range of sets, from spaceships through to squatter camps, through to medical laboratories and military installations. It's a whole range of stuff.
Geotech is quite unique since it is a ex-nuclear facility storage.
We have somehow managed to be able to build our set around, and in the process of building our set around it, we have incorporated this area here, which is the 1980s apartheid nuclear weapons program storage facility. So our film alien weapons props are being stored inside the real nuclear weapons safes that were used in the 80s that housed God knows what in these foot-thick steel doors, which weigh about 70 kilograms each. And you can see, this one is bare, but this is very interesting. Those are not ours. So, yeah, it's a little disturbing, but there they are. They're right there.
Watching Neil direct this from the very beginning has been amazing. It really has. He knows what he wants, and he just has instinct.
Neil's whole approach to this whole movie has just been unbelievable, because he's allowed us to explore the characters and given us such freedom, but at the same time, he's guided us along the whole way, if that makes any sense.
Experience-wise, this has been a dream come true.
I felt totally unprepared. I was completely unprepared. It was a whirlwind of production.
If we do a picture wrap with Shalto, that means we've got nothing more to shoot. So that was indeed Shalto. Thank you very much, sir. Last setup.
Now the film's essentially finished, and it's been your first experience making a feature film. If you had it to do again, is there anything you'd do differently, and why?
And I do a hell of a lot differently. I do a lot differently.
We can can it if you want. It's getting a little crazy.
But I mean, that's what happens with your first film, though, right? Is that you go through an insane learning curve that you can only go through that curve by being thrown into the sort of the meat grinder and coming out on the other side. I kind of want one. I picked something that wasn't conventional, which made things more difficult.
Okay, so this is the Park Road post in New Zealand. Now this is, of course, you can see how fancy this is. That's very big, mixing desk. This is, of course, where they did Lord of the Rings.
I'm Dave Whitehead, doing sound design for District 9, and I'm just playing around with the exosuit at the moment, which is the robot that Vickers jumps in at the end of the film, so been playing with all sorts of noises, from steam trains to truck air brakes to pitch down typewriters to Air Force, Orion hydraulics.
Hi, I'm Brent. I'm one of the 2 supervisors on the job. There's Chris Wall who's supervising dialogue, and I'm doing the effects, all the kind of physical effects and kind of sound design and that kind of stuff, just kind of overseeing that all that material gets done for the final mix. The crew that we have is essentially, as in normal films, is broken down into editors, designers, Foley people and kind of assistants.
We're also doing the Alien at the moment. We're trying to base the aliens around insects more than mammals, so getting more, I guess, insecty type sounds, and crabs, sort of, if a crab could talk, what would it say to you?
There's your name at the top. Christopher Johnson. There's, you're gonna put your
You see how well that works?
Yeah.
That's what I mean. It's like, it's so awesome. Like he's saying yes, and it's like you just get it. Like the alien said that.
Totally.
And it's like with some of the other stuff you lose that because it's like, oh, there's all of these different things happening.
Well, what that is bringing the speech to the forefront.
Yeah.
So that is actually pushing the human speech component, which I guess we're just going to find the happy balance between that, getting it at the right level, so it sounds like the dominant thing, especially for him, I guess, is one of the main things.
Put your scroll on the bottom there. See, there's your name at the top. Christopher Johnson. There's, you're gonna put your name at the bottom.
And we've got a fairly smallish crew on this kind of show, which is we've got Dave Whitehead on sound design, who's kind of incredibly prolific and fantastic kind of insect maker, and we've got 2 effects editors, Mel and Hayden, who no doubt you'll meet, and I'm kind of in a supervisory role, and because this job's so kind of guerrilla-like in terms of its kind of makeup, everybody's pretty much kind of jumping on in terms of all hands to the pump, and so I'm doing quite a lot of cutting on this job as well.
So which one is this?
So that is literally rubbing a pumpkin. So it just sounds... When I was recording the pumpkins, I was standing alone in a room with a butternut, which is a very long sort of gourd-shaped pumpkin, held by my groin, rubbing it gently when someone looked through the window, and it did look a bit strange because I don't think they saw the pumpkin. The other thing was we were thinking about different African languages, and also the language that has the clicks and that sort of thing, so we're putting mandible clicks as well. Clicks and chops and bonks and... Now this is a frog caller, which is pretty much this little dude.
Watching the edit come together was, I'd actually say, even almost more exciting than the pre-production. It was every time it would change.
This is very exciting from an editing point of view because it makes the editing such a crucial part of telling the story, but it also makes it very labor intensive because of the amount of material coming in, and you're not always executing something that's a very specific thing. Sometimes it becomes something else, so you're kind of finding it through the kind of editing process.
Editing this film was very difficult. I mean, just because of the volume of footage that we have. We have an insane amount of footage, and in certain cases, you're going between documentary stuff and cinematic stuff. You can't just play a whole bunch of documentary, real life footage for the audience and then just slam them into a cinematic scene. You have to kind of find the flow within that, and that took a long time to get that to work properly. And then also just going through the hours and hours and hours of different types of documentary footage that we had. We had so much footage.
As much as we're using improv and stuff like that, the script was very well conceived and well structured. So at the same time, you always have a kind of blueprint you're going back to. And as far as things like the security cameras and stuff like that, that makes my assistant editor's lives more difficult because it's yet another format to deal with. But for me, it's just kind of another interesting perspective on the scene. It's an interesting project because it's got a message. You know, obviously there's stuff in there about race and xenophobia.
District 9 certainly doesn't ram any themes or morals down anyone's throats, but it at its heart, it does have interesting questions that are raised about the way people view each other, especially other cultures.
I suppose the interesting thing for me about making the film has been asking the question of, well, what would really happen? You know, what would I really do in this situation? And it raises that question of deciding, well, how different does someone need to be from you, or a species, or something, for you to allow them to affect your life directly?
I think, if anything, just to make a film that's engaging as your first film was what I was hoping to achieve.
That film is Neil growing up in South Africa, loving the films that he loved and being in that environment.
This was not an easy process. There was a lot of stressful moments for me, for sure. You can go through that level of pressure and that level of stress, which ultimately is forced upon myself only because you're asking yourself, is this good? Am I making something that's worthwhile? That's the only place the pressure comes from, really.
The way that this whole film came out of this little short is pretty amazing. You know, it's sort of gone far past anything I think any of us expected.
It's very much centered around Johannesburg, around the political situation that existed in Johannesburg in the apartheid era, and Neil grew up during that period of time.
It's probably, personally, I think, one of the biggest challenges that still faces the entire planet. It's still something that people haven't quite realized, what challenges will still lie ahead in this area of understanding differences, of what differences to accept, what differences to reject, how, as we become one global community, what's going to get washed out, what's going to stay.
Looking at the film now, I'm pretty proud of how much imagery I had in my head prior to going into the film, what I've actually gotten as far as the final product goes, but I still wish there was more. And hopefully I can take what I've learned and implement that in film 2 and kind of, refine the process. But there is an insane amount of learning that happened on this film, believe me.
There's a lot of specific design challenges on any film, and especially this one. This is an unusual brief.
When I started the film, I wanted to implement as much real-world stuff as I could, to have the movie have this grounded feel.
The main challenge actually for this movie is making it just as gritty and true to life as stuff that was shot by Neil.
You have your aliens, and obviously the question is going to be, from somebody, do the aliens have sex? How do they reproduce?
It's always a nervous moment seeing your sets on camera for the first time.
There's two levels that science fiction gets merged with reality. I mean, visually and then conceptually.
Neil had this film rattling around his head for a few years, and he's very, very interested in the design process. So when I first came on board, he had a whole heap of reference stuff that he went, here you go, check this out.
The process starts with drawings, the basic drawings done by Greg Broadmoor, and then they went into 3D design, which David Ming was doing, and that's sort of sculpting. And as Neil saw these things in 3D, then he was able to say, yes, more of that, less of that, more of that.
Most of the design in the film was done by Weta Workshop in New Zealand. And then as we got into, closer to actual production, Phil Ivey and the art department team that actually built the sets and some of the props were involved in design as well. But there's an artist at Weta, Greg Broadmoor, who did a lot of the alien technology.
Yeah, pre-production, I mean, that's part of the film, of course, that me and Larry and Dave and all the design team are most involved with. just visualizing everything in the film, trying to get a feel for what we're actually going to be looking at. And that goes down from the smallest thing, like the little fuel cells that we made, through to the saucer and the interiors and all the shape language that goes into everything, the alien culture, what they're dressed in, what their biology is.
He was responsible for a lot of the alien technology, and we spent a long time. I mean, the whole of 2007 when we were developing the idea, we did literally thousands of illustrations. And so the weaponry was his department.
There are all kinds of weapons equipment designed for District 9. Some of it veered from being very obviously like weaponry, it looks like military firearms, but in this, that's another thing, another aspect of the design is that it had to, there's no camouflage. It's actually quite a high contrast, obvious item, and there's a very machined, almost mass market look to it, which I wanted to get in there, because I want the alien technology to feel corporate as well.
This is high technology from another world, another galaxy, but existing in the physical space of Earth in a believable way.
This is Christmas, my friends. This is the biggest find that I've ever seen.
And then the organic stuff, the alien was, it's gone through many iterations as well. There's hundreds of illustrations of the alien. And I very clearly wanted to have this insect aspect to it.
Well, throughout the entire design process of the creature, we were really very intensely art directed by Neil. He worked with us very closely to make sure that the final creature that ended up on screen was very much his own vision.
When Neil talked to us about what he was looking for with the aliens, he was very specific in that he wanted them to have the feeling of insects that are different than a lot of the sort of aliens that we've seen in the past. He wanted to keep it very colorful and sort of contrasty, bright colors that sort of would stand out as being, something definitely non-reptilian or anything like that. Something just you don't see at that size ever really on Earth.
In the beginning, we had a whole bunch of illustrations, and as we started to refine it, it started to become something that had this insect quality, but was bipedal. And then once we got into the insect idea, it was, well, could it have different colors, like a beetle, or a bee, or a wasp?
What is it? Check it on the side. Check it on the side there. That's it. Control, it's biggest van de merwe. I need a population control team.
The alien eggs were designed really early on, actually. And they had to be a classic archetype. They had to be instantly recognizable.
Now, the idea behind the egg is that it's quite a unique form of reproducing. The alien is asexual. They are also excreting waste, which we do with various things. We've got pus, and then a dark alien blood, and then again our oily goo. And then just clear, like KY jelly, just to give them that feeling that they are a three-dimensional, translucent, sweating alien thing.
They make their egg and they lay it, but then the question is well, how, if the egg's somewhere else, how have they adapted to, because in the ship, the eggs would be put in an area and looked after by the dominant race. So here, they've had to figure out a way to do it. So we decided they use animal carcasses.
The look that Neil was going for was, he wanted the sci-fi to be familiar, and the fact that it was in a third world country in a shantytown is the unfamiliar thing for the audience. So we drew inspiration from many films over the last 15, 20 years, from Alien through to Alien Resurrection, which had some absolutely amazing sets.
Almost like late 70s and 80s science fiction. All of the films that come from that era have a very particular design look about them. And we consciously try to put some of that design geometry into the stuff that we were doing. So a lot of the designs, the spaceships, some of the alien environments, the inside of the mothership, a lot of that will have hints of classic science fiction that was the 70s and the 80s.
We wanted it to be dark, damp, humid. You wanted it to feel as though the ship is still alive, at rest but still alive. The feeling that humans have been boring through it for like 20 years, so that all that rubbish that's in there. First of all, it started as alien rubbish, but then it's become human rubbish. The place is an absolute pigsty.
The biggest challenge with something that's as big as the mothership, which is about 2 to 2.5 kilometers in diameter, is to make something that's that scale look realistic. Because it has a lot of detail, but you don't see the detail directly because it's so huge. The design inspiration for the mothership was basically large refineries, like oil refineries and gas refineries and stuff like that.
So it had to be hyper detailed. I also wanted to make it feel like a refinery, which was something that went through all the design work. Had to feel like it was potentially something that could stop on a ship and start mining resources. So look underneath it, it's just covered in scaffolding and piping and big reservoirs of ore and fuel.
It's how it interacts with the atmosphere or something that big, you know. You see stuff on the ground and it sort of goes off into the distance and it gets more atmospheric. It's how it sort of fades away, you know, around sort of as it goes away from where you are.
Behind me are the first components of the dropship, which has come from the mothership, has landed underneath CJ Shack, and he's quietly been working on for the last 10, 15 years.
Being a ship that had been compacted under the earth for 20 odd years or 15 years, needed to have a very cramped feel about it.
This whole thing's under your shack. For 20 years you've had this fucking thing hidden down here. This is very illegal. I mean, this is a fine, you know.
So inside the story, you have this major multinational company, which is called Multinational United, which in my mind is sort of a conglomeration of most of the world's big companies that has won all of the rights and the patents and, you know, everything that they will be able to glean from the alien technology. But in return, it's not the United Nations, it's our own form of the United Nations, has stated that they're then also responsible for looking after the aliens. It has this other element of private military contractors and everything being privatized, and the idea of privatized police and privatized zoning, and, you know, it's more and more gets taken away from the South African government and more gets put into the hands of this kind of ethicless and moralless huge conglomerate.
What we designed there was their heavy armour, which again was playing to all the Eminu clean, white and simple, benign looking. So their armour is quite futuristic. It has some allusions to the alien stuff because I wanted it to be, you know, really make that connection that Eminu had obviously been trying to understand the alien technology.
First Reaction Battalion and those mercenaries are based on a South African company that was very involved in Africa in the 90s.
White groups have demanded that mercenaries should comply with all UIO regulations in District 9.
When we came across Chihuahua, it was very much in a state of flux, people being moved out, so a lot of shacks had been felled. So we went through a whole process of designing a town that was going to suit our needs in terms of geography for fight action or, you know, just general eviction stuff. We went through this whole process of buying shacks from people that were living there and moving them using their materials.
I think for the entire script, 95% of the props, it's around here. You understand? Because seeing that the film is more about filth, you understand, and, you know, older things, you understand. 95% of the stuff is all around here.
Contractors are closing in on the Nigerian compound.
All of the special effects in the film they're not groundbreaking special effects in terms of pushing new technology or new software, but the exosuit itself is a slightly unique concept in the way that it's portrayed.
You've got to think of it from every angle, how it's actually going to move, and you know that you're probably, as you're designing these things, you're probably creating more problems than you're solving.
When Vicus gets into the suit, this is an extension of himself, so suddenly we have to start paying attention to his body language, the way he runs, the way he pauses, the way he tilts his head, you know, and we ended up shooting reference footage of Vicus performing.
I'm immensely proud of my construction team. I scared the hell out of them with the the first set of plans I gave them, but they really rose to the occasion. I've had a lot of fun with them, and their quality has been fantastic.
The whole experience was rewarding in a sense of being able to achieve what we did with a script in that environment for such a long time.
I don't think we've seen anything really like this before, where it's just you're in a world that's completely normal, except that there's aliens and spaceships in the sky and stuff like that. And that's something that you don't really see that often, and I think it's something that District 9 really, has done that will stand out.
As the work evolved and developed, there's been a nice transition of the work through the different departments, and I feel for the most part went very smoothly, and what we'll see is a world that feels like it was developed as a singular process, with Neil leading the way through all the challenges that come from a physical and a digital marriage.
Oh my God.
Populating the world that we've created has been a challenge because we have limited funds and we have a shitload of aliens that are meant to be living here. There's meant to be like 1.8 million aliens in the story. There isn't massive amounts of research and development time put into creatures or ideas that the human mind hasn't seen before.
A lot of this stuff here, although it's very alien, is still based off a lot of insect and real-life anatomy.
So I try to cut those kind of corners and almost have, in a way, like a mundane alien in a mundane environment, but they're still alien, which makes them interesting.
Well, it was a great relationship working with Neil because he really understands when the stuff is working and not working, and also what he's looking for. He's very decisive. He knew more than anything else that he wanted it to feel natural.
We were going to try to do sort of a motion capture on set as much as possible for shooting it, but it turned out that because of the way that Neil was shooting it, there was so much movement of the camera because he wanted it to be very, sort of a cinema verite look, that it caused a problem with that because you need other cameras on set to also capture the motion capture suits, and they would get in the way.
MNU agents, open please!
Because everything has this improvised approach, you're dealing with a somewhat unpredictable environment. It makes it more difficult to shoot Sholto clean, like as in no alien, get him out, and then shoot the reference for the alien that would either be motion captured later or animated later, and then, put the digital alien in with Sholto. Because each take is different and you're in this improv world, it means you have to shoot them simultaneously so that they're bouncing off of one another correctly.
So we basically just shoot it the way he wants to shoot it, as if it were a documentary, and then we would go back and remove the actor who was playing the alien and replace him with a CG one.
Eviction notices, okay?
The amount of work for Image Engine is, quadrupled because they have to go in with a moving camera and paint Jason out in his grey suit.
And the way that it works is a very multi-layered approach, which is something that I've never done before. So you'll notice when I'm wearing the grey suit that my performance is incredibly wooden and very still, and I tend to move in these sort of sine waves of movement. And the reason I do that is not because I'm terrified, it's because the visual effects will get very angry with me if I move too much, because then it's much more expensive and time-consuming to paint me out.
So they rotomate our digital alien over Jason, who's on stilts, so he's the correct, 7-foot height. They get all of his animation correct. There wasn't any form of tracking. It was all hand animated. They animate his facial expressions. Sometimes additional cameras would be there that are zoomed in on Jay to really get his face and get all of the nuances of his performance in his face. So they'd animate both of those two things, paint him out, and then just have the digital creature there with Sholto. So it's a lot of visual effects work.
Figuring out which option to use and when it's best for Jason to be entirely VFX and not even in the shot, or when you want him as reference in his motion capture suit.
I was hoping for tennis balls with, here's your eye line. But they don't even do that. It's just once the actor's out, it's like, well, do you see where his head was? Yeah, just look behind there. What do you see? Oh, you see that that green dot on the shack there, that piece of paint. Yo, look there. Okay, that's your eye line.
What's that? Go! Oh! 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 Go! Oh! 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 Go! Hey! 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 What's that? Get off! Get off! What's that?
So that was challenging. That was probably the most challenging part of doing the performances, was the times that Jason got pulled out of the scene and I'm playing to fresh air.
Visual effects, I feel comfortable doing for sure, and I really like being in a visual effects environment and working with things that are digital and that you have the ability to kind of refine. You know, that's one of the things that stresses me out about production, is you can't refine things. You have a limited schedule and you have the sun setting and you've got like 45 minutes to get the scene or whatever. You know, it's a stressful environment.
When do I phone? First. And then he comes in the middle of the conversation, or just after? Literally as I hang up?
My on-set approach to dealing with the visual effects and sort of being aware of them, aside from having to paint Jason out and decide which shots were clean of him and which ones weren't, I was very aware of the lighting.
My work here is primarily what I'm doing with this camera set up here and the computer, is that what we do to light the exosuit to make it look really real is we record the environment around us in a 360-degree panoramic. And this camera lens operation here, what it does is you position the camera and the camera will now rotate around the center pivot point, so that when we're taking a 360, all those images line up to create a panoramic view, and that the focal point of the camera is always directly in the center of the tripod. So we go 3 around at 120 degrees, and then we do 1 straight up, which is the sky. And those images are also taken in multiple exposures, so there's about 11 stops in each direction that we shoot, and all those 30, I think it's about 32 images in total, are all combined into one large panoramic sphere that we use then to light the object. So everything around the set becomes a light source. That building that has a certain amount of reflection is a light source. The pole is a light source. Everything becomes picked up by this camera, and then that's what we use to wrap around the 3D object, and that object is lit by an actual image as opposed to computer lights.
You know, one of the ways that you'll help sell photoreal effects is if you give the visual effects artist something that is conducive to being lit in a photoreal way. And then secondly, that you provide them a lighting environment that will help them, will complement, you know, their ability to make it look photoreal. For example, having some sort of translucent jellyfish creature put inside a UV black, you know, black light disco environment would not be a good way to go. A better way to go would be to have some sort of, you know, hard surface metallic, or just something that doesn't absorb light but that bounces light, and put it inside a harsh lighting environment, like a directional single light, like sunlight. You'll get a good result, and you'll get a clean, hard shadow, and it'll sit in that place, you know, in quite a photoreal way.
So we'll just have to go and...
It's always a challenge just for computer animation to get really emotional facial expressions and stuff in the first place. And when, you know, the aliens, most of his face is covered by shell, it's even harder.
So getting that kind of emotional level of performance out of the alien was a major concern of mine. But one of the things I think that helps that right from the beginning is if you give the animators as much reference as you can. And in most cases, they were painting Jason Cope out, but they were rotomating his performance.
There's also an antenna that we put screw into the skull cap, and that's to assist the visual effects team.
If you have him perform the scene, and you have him performing against Sholto, and just conveying that level of emotion, and the animators rotomate him, and then they paint him out, in theory, you should have, you know, retained the essence of that performance. But then there's other complicating factors, like his language is completely bizarre, and you're reading subtitles, right? So that's another level of separation. His facial features are different. He doesn't have a mouth. He's got a whole bunch of like disgusting tentacles.
One of the main challenges we had was to make something that looked sort of insectoid and also alien, so not exactly like an insect, but sort of gave the feeling of insects, but was alien, and then also that could emote and that the audience could relate to.
You're only getting 50% of what humans read emotionally, you know, which is the eyes. You're not getting the lower part of the face.
So there was definitely a lot of work done in figuring out how those pieces of shell could move together to create the motions. You have to sort of, you know, have something recognizable by humans, even if it's a completely alien creature that they can relate to and realize that that's the emotion they're going to.
So I was completely stressed out that we wouldn't be conveying the emotional resonance that needed to happen with that character. But now, I'm okay.
So, there was lots of challenges in different ways between getting the interaction of the aliens with humans and then just getting lots of aliens in there.
The most fun for me tends to be the finishing touches.
I think the most satisfying thing for me would be that Neil sort of conceptualized this completely alternate, reality. It's our world, but it just has this one thing that's different.
What I want it to be, and what I hope it's on the rails to becoming, is a science fiction piece that is presented in a slightly more unusual way. It has lots of elements of traditional filmmaking, but it also has some other elements that are a little bit less traditional, and the setting is very untraditional. So all I'm trying to do is make a film that has all of the sci-fi elements that I really like, injected into a slightly twisted version of how we normally see it.
So here we are, another day in the chair. I have to say it's turning out to be a lot longer than I was expecting, I thought it was going to be easy, but it's not easy.
Vicus's transformation was actually not that difficult to film. It required sometimes 5 hours of makeup for him, but it was all practical. There's no visual effects with anything to do with his transformation.
They just asked me if they could remove the nail with anesthetic. I said yes, and then I put it back. So there it is. I can't really feel any of the thumb at all. No, I'm just joking. I got you though, eh?
He's been a very interesting character to develop. He's gone through quite extreme transformation, which has been exciting and fun. Oh, okay, now time for your hair removal.
It is okay, because they're saving money on you.
I am serious.
It kind of really stressed me out before we started shooting because I wasn't sure if it was going to work or not. Like, I'm so comfortable with visual effects, and I'm a lot less comfortable with practical effects.
Not too much blood though, eh? No, that's all the blood we're doing. Yeah, the rest is good.
Yeah, no, it looks good. The original thinking was more along the lines of a virus, or almost like if you think of it like a rash, where you could have a point that would be extremely contaminated, and then you'd have a gradient of fall off into health. And I just kind of figured out one day that it didn't need to be that way. It needed to be a much more psychological, violent, repulsive protrusion.
This is fantastic blood. It actually disturbs me to look at this.
Very realistic.
Yes.
That's very close, Neil.
He gets the infection, and he starts to have subtle changes. He loses a couple of his fingernails.
It's making it more believable. Relaxing it down to ice.
How many more we got here?
And then he experiences hair loss.
I didn't think it was totally necessary, but as you can see, this whole area now is gone. These are not real veins. She's also drawn these. I mean, some of them are a little bit real, but she's also goes over them, so it makes it very difficult for you to see what is actually real and what is not.
In a fight with an alien, he has a fracture in his forearm, so his arm goes into a cast. And during that period, the alien virus starts to take hold. From that point on, he goes through a series of 3 other transformations, a progression up the left side of his body into the alien character.
It's not just prosthetics, it's the makeup as well. So as he's going through this transformation, I mean, there are times in the morning where I'm so tired and you come in at 3 o'clock in the morning and you just, thankfully they're all amazing people because you're tired, you're exhausted. It would have been torture if I'd had unpleasant prosthetics and makeup people.
Didn't sleep well at all last night because I had to sleep with this arm piece, this whole top piece, the whole shoulder piece that I did in the scene last night. They had run out of the prosthetic, so I had to sleep with it.
Makeup was a huge deal. I mean, it would go between, 30 minutes to literally like 5 hours sometimes.
We've sat here now for 5.5 hours to break the record. done some great work. I mean, this looks very convincing, obviously. And I'm supposed to be tired in the scene, and I'm also tired because I've been sitting here the whole time. So it's, and now they say they can't do the scene and we have to take it off.
Before we see the alien flipper, we see that he's lost some hair. His eyes start getting very dark and he's got a pale, sickly look. So we incorporate all this to just give the feeling that he is undergoing some internal physical turmoil and some change.
A lot of the times I'll close my eyes for like an hour. I'll be sitting in the chair, and when I open my eyes, my whole physical body is transformed. It's not just the flipper, it's the face, it's the hair, it's the wounds on the face. I'm a bit fatigued today. It's quite serious. They hit you from all sides. And you just look at yourself and you just feel bad. I mean, it's just, you can't not have gaping wounds on your head in a creature's arm. And it puts you right in the scene, it puts you right in the headspace.
Okay, here I go.
It's very painful.
There's this kind of like 1980s, like, you know, horror film aspect to using that kind of prosthetic stuff that I really like.
In our first stage, we have the flipper and a pre-eruption forearm appliance, which is made of foam. And then as we progress in the storyline, we have the flipper and then a more disturbing forearm appliance that is just a further progression of this virus. And then we get into the flipper forearm and then an upper arm appliance, and that's third stage.
You wouldn't think it, but it's very cold. The goo and the stuff they're putting on me is very cold.
On days where they'd made me up like that, I would feel, I would just sort of sit with that feeling of just feeling really bad, you know, when the camera was off. And so people would just constantly come up and go, are you okay? Are you alright?
Then we get to the point where we have the reveal in the hospital.
It's actually the moment where my flipper is revealed.
Okay, Paul, very close. And the doctor's clipping away at this cast, and he's itchy and he's agitated. And all of a sudden, you know, it opens enough to where we see the flipper come out of this cast, and of course, mayhem ensues.
It should be a Mel Gibson film because he's tortured so much. I really found that I had to get into a very calm and relaxed kind of place in myself to hit a lot of those scenes as an actor, because it really does take its toll on you, you know, when you're physically restrained like that.
This on my lap is the Vicus upper body full stage transformation foam appliance. There, I said it. So this is what we use when we're in our fourth stage. Of course, we've got a separate forearm appliance, but this is made of foam. And so we'll glue this on, is what we do in the morning, and then we go through the long process of blending the edges and then doing a layer of Pax paint, which is a water-based acrylic glue. What we'll do is we'll usually wipe him down with isopropyl alcohol or some astringent just to get the oils off his body so that the sticking is going to work. I'll start on the bald patches, I'll start on some of the facial bruising, the eye makeup for the dark circles and what have you, and Jaakko will start applying forearm and flipper. And then I will join in and start doing the upper body, the chest area, and start working into this transformation. Open, look down at me. Okay, close for me.
I really thought the worst was over, you know. I thought, well, most of my art scenes are done. I forgot about this.
When we're doing the full transformation makeup, it takes about an hour 15 to get him out.
We are here, obviously, this is what I go through every day, so obviously this has now been taken off. So not only do I have to get here 2 hours before time, but I also have to get here, this is the ball spot that has come off, okay? This is one of them, Joe's working on the other one and Sarah's working, and you can see under here, I can just show them, this was on here because I'm blistering.
we have to be gentle in taking it off, because if we rush it, then his skin will damage his skin, and then his skin will get agitated, and then we'll have issues the next day with application. We have to be very gentle with this.
The part that really upsets me, Encia, if you just open the door there and you just have a peek out. Okay, Joe, just show him. By the time we get out there, party's gonna be done. I don't know. They say that the lead has power, you know. Do you see power? Yeah, Sarah. I said, can I just have a sausage roll, you know, from the braai? We asked for that.
They may have forgotten.
That hasn't come.
They're drunk now. Joe and I, when we took on this project, we knew it was going to be difficult. We knew we'd have some mountains to climb, and we have. And we feel really good about the end result.
Yeah. What? No more.
Are you talking about you?
I want to fight you, man. No more.
No, but is it because of this or the dying?
I want to fight.
You are all very boring office workers, okay? A lot of the time we're just going to be shooting sort of documentary style-ish.
In a nutshell, what the film's been, it's been a progression from an idea that was almost exclusively improv, with a bunch of interesting mixtures of like Africa and science fiction.
The dialogue is very, very, if you can tell, the improvisation is wonderful, which in writing it was a little bit hard to imagine how that was going to work.
Are you on her when it goes off?
Yeah, I'm going to be on her when it goes off.
So when you swing the camera back around, your bolt's up. Yeah. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Like completely away.
Yeah.
And then you can totally just. So do you put the do you trip it and then battle to put the tray down?
I don't know. I don't know.
That's what you should do.
I mean, as the last one, I could mess on her. I mean, that would really. I wanted to mess stuff, but I'm so nervous of doing this. You know.
Prior to knowing that I was making District 9, I would have thought, and I did think, that the first film I was going to do would be incredibly locked down and thought out and planned and methodically worked out. I think I'm going to do that for my second film.
Really talking to camera, so I'm just the intro. It's not take long.
Exactly. The only time you're talking is if you want to shout to guys off screen.
Yeah.
Because we wrote it in a way that provided a framework for the actors to improv in. Charlotte's amazing at improv. He is so funny and he's just so good, and he can do it completely different each time just without missing a beat.
I'm serious about that, man. That fucking thing came. It fucking took off. I swear to God, it was like a fucking container, like a bucket that they used to wash some fucking salvage or something in.
That appealed to me, you know, I didn't and still don't have any sort of major acting aspirations, but I've always enjoyed doing characters and doing improv and always been able to do that.
Yeah, just please, God damn it. If we could pick some of that shit up, you know, then it...
My brother, you know blood is thicker than water. You know that. Whether it's blood for chicken, a blood for a cow, or a blood for a person like you.
Yeah, no, I understand
just
it. I understand it. No, you don't. There's no...
The bottom line is I wanted it to feel as real as possible.
Okay.
I think improv has a reality about it. As long as the actors are delivering.
You are a joke, right?
I'm joking.
Yeah.
So prostitutes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Okay, dude, I think that's it. You run into trouble sometimes with scenes that need to be very structured. Like once you're out of the bizarre world and you're into drama, you can be walking on thin ice if you're not careful.
One of the really cool things we found out was, like, so many people would go in the same direction, and then just one or two would go left or right, which was quite cool. And then once that happened, then you knew you had someone that you could work with, improv-wise, which was quite cool.
What Neil's able to do is he's able to watch a situation just unfold, really. You know, it's really a fulfilling process artistically to sit in that sort of situation, because you have someone with a very particular ability to see things.
I'm watching for what I want to see and direction on what needs to be accomplished. As long as those beats are hit and things are feeling correct, then we keep going. And the moment they veer off, then it needs to be corrected. You're going to be whining and moaning.
Okay.
So remember, it's whining and moaning before he's here. Okay. And then once he's here, you try to toughen up a little bit.
Yeah.
The camera is total documentary camera, so you can be as aware of it as you want.
it's definitely a conscious thing on his part. You know, it's not that he can't storyboard the frame and tell you the monster's 2 millimeters away, turn, you know, which would be a normal visual effects movie.
Why don't we instead of this, why don't we make the sniper a merc? So we just use the other merc. What?
Yeah, no, that's right. So make sure it's done to you. Yeah.
It's really forced everybody on the team to up their game. As an actor, as a visual effects supervisor, you know, the guys have got to watch and the shots are coming together in the moment.
We also injected elements into it that would make it, you know, an engaging story, hopefully, and something that keeps people locked.
Straight into the heart.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying! Fuck you!
Can I see him?
Not a good idea.
At first, I was scared because you feel responsible, and then the natural human response is don't do anything because it's the safest thing to do. Just sit here and your mind will freeze over.
You're clever. You see the law is coming down there now, eh? You want to use these weapons to...
Don't just stare at me as well.
Must I scream and react?
No, don't smile at me as I break your arm.
Shelter would come and he'd be vicious, and I'd just stare at him and be like, there'd be nothing in my mind. And that was the first couple of days after, you know, perpetually tired, and then suddenly something flipped over and we started enjoying ourselves and just allowing ourselves not to be scared.
You just play the field of it, eh?
On my first day, I had a problem that I wasn't saying much, and then the second day happened again. It was another problem, but then I realized that the levels of the characters are quite different.
This is always the thing. Never, when the parent is around, don't go near the egg. It's just going to go ugly, you know?
I'm going to give him until next.
Oh, Hannes van der Merwe, he got nailed, you know? He thought he was going to be clever.
In the back of my mind, I always say, just say something, but you know, it's hard to jab in something when Shelter is on an automatic running pace.
So guys, hang on. So Jay, I like that, but you just got into it without even knowing why he's here. You've got to extract more info first.
Okay, cool.
You don't know why he's here.
Cool, okay. Yeah.
So ask a few questions and then let it elevate.
What's in the action and now explain the shit to me.
When you try and force something that doesn't fit in, it sounds very pathetic and very tacky.
It's a very, very delicate balance, but the thing to remember that's important is that the story is set, and the points along the timeline of the story are set. What it does is it allows the actors to fluctuate within that timeline and to change their tone and to get into how they want to portray the character at that particular time.
The fact that you are set with a very rigid special effects department. You're set with a very rigid science fiction background and a very rigid idea as to what acting is about. And then you've got this freedom for a film actor of workshopping number one, which Shelter, myself and Neil did quite a bit in pre-production.
I didn't. They're lying. They keep drugging me. You can't remember, but
Sometimes it's terrifying because you feel this big plate of responsibility and you arrive in this beautiful set and you can just see that the art department has broken their back over the set and there's people exhausted, collapsed in the corners after having decorated all night. And you feel the responsibility of, okay, now, if I'm going to improvise in the scene, I'd better improvise very well. And then that obviously, they roll camera and you go,
It's stressful. I mean, it's a very stressful environment to work in because you're thinking on your feet the whole time. It's incredibly exhausting. You keep wondering if you're making the wrong choices. Are we leading people down the wrong road? Because you're making it up on the spot.
Neil could see a little spark of something in a performance and say, rather go with that, because that can work with my storyline. And then you develop an additional part of the storyline. So as far as Killing Him is concerned, there is a certain sort of, look at the way a real man does it, towards Vickers. I mean, that's in the back.
It is.
Normally your character is defined by the words he says and the situation he finds himself in. So there's a limited environment. Here we had an odd combination.
if you approach that kind of work in the right way, you will come up with better material. And if you're all focused in a similar way and you know what you're doing, you stand a better chance than if you're just going to be reading your lines.
Quibus is refined a little bit more. The interesting thing with his character is that his arc it's like the age-old sort of movie character who's in Vietnam as a soldier, and then by the end of the film you start realizing that they're actually like naturally a psychopath who has been given license to kind of like do what they really would default to want to do if they were left to their own devices.
I wasn't called onto sets early in the production that often, so finding a relationship with the director was very important. Knowing what he wanted was very important, and listening to the overview for me was a big importance.
He's also taken on quite a life of his own in terms of developing Quibus and making him be a character that has quite a lot of layers to him.
The problem with the pens is I would give him the pen, so that keeps making a problem.
It's vital, yeah, with Sholto. I mean, what he does is he goes from being an oppressor to being the oppressed, and it's that curve that we have to very, carefully plot. And that's what I'm keeping my eye on the whole time with the film.
It definitely was, I think, a process for everybody, and particularly obviously for him, but myself included, to work out what the characters were going to be.
I still know where I want him to get to and what he needs to do in order to get there, but he's doing it by hitting those points that I'm watching for and very much throwing Vicus into that at the same time. So two things are happening at the same time. Here, they're just going to give it to me here.
I say that.
Yeah, you say that, because you don't want to go to the med lab.
Doesn't he say get it done in the field?
So he may go off on a tangent which is wrong, and then it needs to be brought back in. Or he could go off on another tangent which is completely correct, and something that I totally did not ever conceive.
Did you see how fast that drone was, Trent?
Yeah, he was fast.
Oh, this guy was fast, so I promise you.
One thing that is sort of a byproduct of the whole process that I am really proud of is the amount of emotion that comes through Vicus.
What is happening to my arm? Just breathe deep. What is happening to my arm, doctor? What is this all about?
Just breathe deep. Just calm down.
And, a mixture of the parameters that were written for him, because it was improv predominantly, but we wrote the parameters that he would operate inside of. I think that from a character level, his ability to draw you in and the framework that we placed him inside of created a surprisingly more elevated emotional experience, I think, than I was expecting. And I'm proud of that. I think that's another thing that I'm pretty proud of.